I saw this ad for this position at NASA. I might be the only person in the United States who actually qualifies for this position.
Do you think SpaceX is beating NASA? What is one thing that the Indian Space Agency can learn from NASA?
My brother said to me, "You're good at solving problems." And being an MBA is really about problem solving. But if you want to go to an MBA school, here's a check. You owe me a check for $10,000. So we're trading futures, the oil futures, big numbers, lots of people, big trading. I worked with the vice president to try to develop how to manage their currency across Europe.
What's the problem with these smart people?
They're not so familiar with failure. You're a smart guy from MIT, you go to NASA, you're average. But when we get intellectual, we tend to think that's just emotions. Those people who are building the things, they know what works. If you make people smarter, you get smarter. Everybody wins. And when you write it down in a map, it sticks. And then you can learn from it.
Growing up in different cultures, what does it do to an individual?
We studied by candlelight very often. We swam in the lake, trekked in the mountains, we saw wild animals. We also traveled all over India.
Feeling like Gandhi?
Like Gandhi, yes. We've experienced what he experienced. We saw the country. Now we're in boarding school in India. Then I graduated and went back to the States for college. I felt like a foreigner.
What would you advise for those young entrepreneurs who want to make exceptional leaders to learn the art of managing complexities?
Learn from every decision you make. Articulate your model of thinking. The thinking ability is by far underestimated. Definition kya hai? A professor came to me, he said, "We'd like to offer you direct admittance to the PhD program." Something like that confronts you, that a man with nothing will offer something to me as a custom. That changes you. But this is the Indian culture. You don't forget that. It makes you think, maybe I shouldn't give up and say, I'm not doing much. Do what you can do, and it will multiply. We went to Lebanon in 1982 to do some, missionary relief work. While big war broke out, Israel and moved into South Lebanon. You should do this when you're young. Why give the last days of my life when I'm old and tired and can't do much? Give some of your strength. The only other thing I've regretted over my life is
Greetings everyone. I'm your host Shivank, and today we have a very interesting guest. I heard about Professor Edward 2 years back. I got an opportunity to meet him in National Capital Region a year ago. And after so much patience, finally we are with him. So he served as the Chief Knowledge Advisor Officer at NASA for more than 17 years. He was also a recipient of NASA's Exceptional Service Medal. He is a PhD from Cornell, visiting faculty at various colleges. Currently, we are recording this episode at ISB. And he's also a consultant, a musician, and he wears a lot of hats. And in fact, his WhatsApp DP is also wearing a hat. I was just wondering, Professor, you will wear that hat in the podcast, but you're looking great today. And thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Nice to be here.
So, Professor, many people don't know that you spent some time of your college, of your school days, early school days in India.
Yes.
Take us through that point. How was it back then? How was, learning in India during, your childhood days?
So I came to school in India in 1972. So not long after the Bangladesh War, Indira Gandhi, emergency powers, rations, shortages of electricity, all those things were going on. I stayed 4 years, 1972, 1976, in Kodaikanal International School in Tamil Nadu. So boarding school there. And we studied by candlelight very often. The electricity was limited. We swam in the lake. We trekked in the mountains. We saw wild animals, elephants, boars, all kinds of bulls.
You rode them as well?
Buffaloes. No, we didn't ride. I was in Kodaikanal from 1972 to 1976. 4 years in boarding school there. And we traveled all around the country by train, mostly third-class train and bus, sort of like you said, like the Gandhi's experience. It was a very interesting experience to not just tour India. We didn't just go visit Taj Mahal, take a picture and go home, like some tourists. We saw the country, and I think we became part of us. We got that dust in our shoes, so to speak. We saw a lot of wildlife in Kodaikanal in the mountains, and trekked and hiked all over the mountains to remote places. Saw people in villages who are very destitute, from very destitute to the top. So it was a very traumatic experience. And I think it really affected my life tremendously of who I am and appreciation I have for people of all different types and walks, and food, of course.
We will come to your favorite food, of course, and your, taste of Indian cinema, Indian food, Indian things. But you mentioned that it had a, tremendous impact on your life as a person. It shaped you as a person. What were certain things that happened during that time? Not only in India, but also your time in Lebanon, in Saudi Arabia.
Let me give you a story from Canal from when I was in school in India. So I'm an American, living in a boarding school in India. So I'm in the street of Madurai one day, just walking down the street, and there's a man living with his family under a tarp. It's tied to a pole, and between the pole and some wall, he has made some little space for a tarp, and he's sitting there, and probably his wife sitting next to him with the small child, and he's got one bowl, and from this one bowl, they are eating some rice. They have like no possessions. They're just sitting there, living on the street. And I stopped and I looked, and I was just taking this in. So I was processing what I just described to you. This is this man's entire life, sitting in this 2 square meters of this place. And I didn't realize I was staring. I had stopped, I was staring. And the man stopped. He looked up at me, and he offers me his rice. You don't forget that. He offers me his rice. And I was embarrassed, and I said thank you, and I left. He didn't ask for money. He wasn't begging. He had probably been working, somewhere, labor work. But this is the Indian culture. Something like that confronts you, that a man with nothing will offer something to me as a custom. That changes you. It makes you think, there's something here that I don't have that I want. I want some of this culture.
Wow. So what was the reason you were, traveling? Your father was a physics teacher, right?
My father was a physics professor.
A professor, yes. And so was he changing job, which made you stay in Saudi Arabia? You grew up in Saudi Arabia and then came to...
Yeah, no.
What was the story behind that?
The long story is, my grandparents went to China.
Okay.
In 1918, 1920, something like that. And they spent 5 years helping establish the Peking General Hospital, which exists today.
There is a Peking University also, and one of the famous universities in China. Yeah, has it some relation with?
The hospital is still there. I don't know about the university, but so my mother was born in Beijing, in 1923. So she grew up. She always wanted to travel and go places. Now she could never go to China during her life because of the communist takeover. That only happened later, but it opened back up for visits. So she wanted to travel, and so she convinced my father to take a job in 1966 in Saudi Arabia. He had an offer to go there and teach in a new university, brand new college being built, just from scratch. So they had to bring all the faculties from abroad, kind of like they did at ISB and other places here, right? They had to bring all the faculty to get started. So they brought all this faculty. We went there in 1966, and they stayed there till 1977, I think, 6 or 7, 7, 8. So they lived there. So I grew up there in Saudi Arabia in a local American school, but there was no high school. So they had to send you for boarding school.
Okay.
So many of the people went to Europe or back to the US, for boarding school. But my brother and I came to Canal and went to Canal school, which was a very interesting experience. So we had grown up in Saudi Arabia as kids. Now we're in boarding school in India. Then I graduated, went back to the States for college. I felt like a foreigner. More of my life had been lived outside the U.S. and formative years, not older years, not the young years. And I didn't really know how to drive a car. I didn't know any popular music. I didn't know what fast food was people were eating. All these different things. I'll share one interesting story happened to me. So when I was my first year in college, I'm in the dining hall. When you go in the big dining room, take a tray, you sit down, get your food. All the students know what to do. I'm like, what's happening? So I'm sitting at a table by myself. I didn't know anybody. And I noticed it got quiet around me, and students are all looking at me. And I became very self-conscious. Did I do something? Yeah. Did I forget to put my pants on? What have I done? And what are they looking at me for? And I looked down, and in my tray, I was eating mashed potatoes with my fingers.
The Indian way?
Indian way, by my hand. I was used to it. And I wasn't even thinking of it. So people look at, well, who's this guy? He's crazy. He's eating mashed potatoes with his fingers. And he must have come from the hospital, something escaped or something. And I just realized how different, for me, it was normal. Of course, I grabbed my knife and fork and I tried to behave as the local customs were. But this is what I mean by I felt foreign, in a sense, to my own country. It took me a while. I mean, it took a while to get adjusted.
Wow. Growing up in different cultures, what does it do to an individual? You kind of develop respect towards different cultures. You kind of, develop empathy towards humankind. And you kind of see that everybody is human at the base level. What other things happen?
The other thing that I think that's really important is if you learn some language. So I learned Arabic when I was young and when I was in college. And so being able to speak Arabic, and you go to an Arab country, like later I went to Lebanon, and you learn to speak to them in their language. It's a completely different connection than when, say, someone from Tamil Nadu is speaking English with someone from France. So neither of them are speaking their own language. And it's a more forced conversation. It can happen very well. But when you want to get close to people and culture, learn the nuances of their language. So I was very sorry. One of the things I was most sorry about is that when I was in Cornell, I never studied Hindi or even Tamil as a language, which I could have, but I didn't. But I didn't know that later I'd be spending so much time in India. So it was a mistake. But I've studied a little bit of Hindi on my own. In the last few years, I've been teaching in India. I don't speak Hindi. I can't carry on a conversation in Hindi. But if you learn the words and the basics and the ideas, you get the sense of the feeling of it a little bit, which helps a little bit to connect with people. And I think that's just as important as understanding the food or the clothing or the cinema or cultural norms. Yeah, that can help tremendously. And it's one thing I think Americans particularly aren't very good at because we're spoiled. Everyone speaks our language. And so I think taking an effort to learn even a little bit. I went to France. My brother lives in France. And we spent a week in France. But I just bust up on some French. Even 5, 10, 15 words. It shows that you respect and that you care some. And you learn some of the greetings, that have some really colorful meaning to them that help understand how people are thinking.
What are some words in Hindi that you have learned?
Definition kya hai? And some of these things like, Professor ji, mujhe ye chahiye. So you learn the things that the students say. But it shows that some feeling for their feeling, what they're having and how they're thinking. And I think it can build a connection. Like you said, like with cinema and food and clothing. You don't need to learn the whole language. You don't need to adopt full Indian clothing, but some gestures can go a long way to showing some respect and some consideration.
Also, Professor, you mentioned that your 5 years in Lebanon.
Yes.
Was a crazy experience.
Yes.
And you were serving during the time of war.
Yes.
And there was a time in your life when you felt you had no skills and you had nothing. You just knew how to, transfer, how to give away the blankets. Tell us through that story, how that Lebanon time happened. What were you doing exactly? And when was the time when your brother asked you to go for an MBA?
Oh, so we went to Lebanon after we were married. In 1982.
And how did you meet your wife?
I met her at Ohio State in college.
Okay.
Yeah. First day, first love. 3 years later, married. So it's a lovely story. But we went to Lebanon in 1982 to do some, missionary relief work, help the people. People were in wartime. We went with some Christian organization just to do help. The idea that you should do this when you're young. Why give the last days of my life when I'm old and tired and can't do much? Give some of your strength. Then afterwards take for yourself. But this was sort of our philosophy.
And who kind of inspired you to do that?
It's a Christian philosophy that says you should give your first fruits. So the idea of offering something to God is you get something and you give the first one, the best one. You don't give the last cake that's burnt and you dropped on the floor that you give for the dog. You give the best and the first one, and then you get seconds and thirds for yourself. I mean, that's the idea. So this was the thinking that we had. So we're young, we have time, we have no kids yet. Let's go do something. We went to Lebanon. There was a big war broke out. And we didn't know that. We didn't plan to go to the war. We planned to go there and just do some work. But big war broke out. Israel and moved into South Lebanon. All kinds of fighting. I mean, not that different than today in a sense, but different place. But again, because I spoke Arabic, I quickly became responsible for a lot of operations. So you're doing this. I'm running all around the southern half of the country, delivering foods and supplies and helping villages reestablish, opening schools, getting people back on their feet, just all kinds of things. I mean, whatever needed to be done. And we had a lot of interesting experiences. Some of our friends were killed. They were butchered, shot, murdered, mostly for money or just for spite, something. None of us had any weapons or were doing anything. It was all charity work. We had some close calls, people shooting at us, bullets hitting the car, things. So you begin to realize, okay, maybe God had something in mind for my life. I should keep going. Because I could have ended there, could have ended there. For example, when we were going in Saudi, when I was a young boy, we went to Iran for a tour. We visited all of Iran. When we had tea with the Shah. Imagine those days. And on coming back, I contracted meningitis. I was about 11 or 12, something like that. And it can be very fatal. Pneumococcal meningitis in the spine. So we got home. I was feeling very sick. My father was looking at me one evening in the house, like after being home 1 or 2 nights. And he said, I think we should take Eddie to the hospital. So he took me to the hospital. In that hospital, there happened to be an American doctor in Saudi Arabia from Aramco who was visiting the hospital that day. He looked at me and he said, this boy has meningitis. Take him in for a check. They did a spinal tap and all this. He came out and said he has meningitis. They put me on antibiotics. I was in the hospital 2 weeks. When I came back, my father said, the doctor told me when he saw the test, when I brought you to the hospital, if you brought him tomorrow, he's probably dead. So you have some experiences like this in your life. And if you look back, we all have some things like that. It makes you think, maybe I shouldn't give up and say, I'm not doing much, I don't know much, what can I do? Do what you can do. Do what you can do, and it will multiply. That's what I believe. So we did some work for 5 years there. Many people were touched. Many people got their lives changed and bettered, we hope. Still, it's not fixed. We didn't fix everything to do with Middle East and Lebanon, but you helped some people. So you do what you can. Those people got helped. Yeah, those have a better life. And something else moved on. And then we had to leave in 1987. So we left with basically nothing, like refugees. And we went back to the U.S. And that's where I think you were mentioning I had no skills. My skills were handing out blankets and talking to people in no marketable skills. I took some odd jobs, just being in office. I was a secretary to a guy in an office who had a consulting company. He tried to teach me some things. Which he did. And we did some other odd jobs just to kind of make ends meet. We had 2 children at the time, small children by then. So it was a very difficult time. And we ended up living on a farm. Okay? So I was not doing agriculture, although my degree was actually in agriculture, but I'm interested in agriculture. We ended up on this farm because this lady took pity on us. And she had a farm that needed someone they had horses. It was a big farm, hundreds of acres. And these horses, people kept their horses there and they would come and ride them, like a pleasure riding. So she needed someone to do maintenance. You mowed the grass on these big fields, you shoveled the manure from the barns, you kept the roads clean, you trimmed the trees, painting, just everything like that. And you could live on the farm. So you had a free place to live and you got to, so it was an opening for us. It was another door, something you can do. I can't do that, but I could do this. So I'm living on this farm, driving a tractor, cleaning barns and cutting grass, and I got a job consulting at Procter Gamble. How? What was this story? So I put on my suit and tie. I go down to Procter Gamble. I consult with them on their product development. I come back, put on my jeans and my T-shirt, and I go drive a tractor. All in the same day.
How did that happen? What was the story?
It was a connection. So I took an odd job for a temp agency, just as a typist.
Okay.
Go and type something, whatever they needed. It was this guy's office. His secretary was out. So I worked with him for 1 week. He said, what are you doing? you know so much. Come work for me. So he hired me on the spot. It's a contractor,
Yes.
for fee. So I worked in his office for more than a year and a half. Larry Houston, very interesting man. He went on to do all kinds of work for Procter Gamble, wrote articles in Harvard Business Review. He's a lot of product development. So I learned a lot from him, a lot about things, how they worked and how companies worked. And I was good at making charts and making PowerPoints and making presentations, and my language was good. So I made him look good. So I was his aide in a sense, which he wasn't getting from any of his secretarial support. Yeah. So it was a good fit. He was an interesting guy, but I learned a lot from him.
Also, we'll cover the story. How did you came to NASA? But you studied agronomy in your undergrad.
Yes.
And then you did a master's in international business.
Yes.
Recently, I've been reading a lot of multidisciplinary thing, and the best innovation happens at the, amalgamation of different things. So I was reading this book called, this is a famous guy who runs a $5.6 billion asset under management firm called Nalanda Capital. So he wrote a book about what he learned from Darwin about investing. So it's the theory of evolution where he's giving analogies about teaching. So what were certain, analogies from the world of agronomy, which you kind of applied maybe to the international business? Or were there even some things, or maybe some things from international business which came handy to your job at NASA?
So one of the things so when I was doing agriculture at Ohio State, I was taking lots of courses. I was pushing the program. In fact, I looked into doing an independent study program because my colleague from Cornell School, one of my classmates, an American guy, he lived in Hyderabad, and his father was running the farm ICRSAT, this crop research institute, agricultural research. He was building it.
Okay.
So he came from US to build this farm, which Indira Gandhi opened with a ribbon and all that. It's a very famous farm. It's there outside Hyderabad. So I knew that. So I wrote to him and I said, could I maybe do some independent study in agriculture and work on this ICRSAT research station in India? Chance to go back to India. So I'm going to call it. So I arranged all this. My professors were happy. They said, this is amazing. You're going to go, these people, you can go there and do the free. So I came to India in my junior year. And I spent 6 months in Hyderabad. I did some research with growing crops. This was all about intercropping. So what they found quickly was that traditional farmers often grow two crops in the same field.
Right.
One row of sorghum, one row of groundnuts, one row of sorghum, whereas modern cropping, it all should be homogeneous because it's easy to plant with mechanized devices.
Right.
So these guys at ICRSAT were saying, but we find if we do this intercropping, we get more yield.
Okay.
Now, the poor farmer doesn't use all the accoutrements we have. But if you use modern agriculture with this intercropping technique, you get more yield than 100% for one field. But they didn't know why.
Mm-hmm.
So I was doing research on this, growing crops together, measuring their roots, digging their soil, agricultural research. I went back to Ohio State, finished some more advanced classes. A professor came to me. He said, we'd like to offer you direct admittance to the PhD program for agriculture. I said, why? He said, your research project you did as an undergrad student is better than most of our master's programs. We'll waive your master's degree and put you directly in the PhD program for agricultural research. But I didn't want to do research. I wanted to go help farmers, help people do things. That was my motivation for studying agriculture, not to be a professor in research. So it was an interesting twist because I left that for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
And
because they were forcing you to go to PhD?
I didn't want to be a researcher in a laboratory. I wanted to go help people like I did in Lebanon, right? So like we ended up doing in Lebanon years later. So I left that and went off and we went to Lebanon instead after finishing college, where I didn't do any agriculture, but I used Arabic, which I had also studied. But we were working hand in hand, with the ground level, working with people, helping them do that. But this intercropping thing taught me something.
What was that?
And that was what I thought you asked me about. I never forgot this all my life. The farmers know how to do things by years and years of experience. They may not know the scientific explanation behind it,
but they do the right thing.
They know what works. And so often when you get in situations where you're talking to people in a business, let's say, those people who are building the things, they know what works. They know why it will or won't work because they are hands-on with this stuff. But we come with our quality control tools and our knowledge management and our inside competitive analysis tools and theories and SWOT analysis out galore. And we tell them what they all should do. And they look at their hand, oh, these silly people. What are they doing? But that's what you want.
All the consultants do that.
That's what you want. I'll do it for you because you say so. And they go off and have lunch and talk about how silly they are. We rarely listen to the people who know what's actually happening. There are exceptions, a boss day disguises himself and goes around the shop floor, these kind of anomaly things. But I mean, actually sit and listen to what they're doing. It's a tremendous lesson. And it applies equally to business, just like from these researchers with farming. I credit them for listening to the farmers rather than saying, no, you should just mechanize everything and do it our way. They said, wait, what do you have for you? Something is there. Let's listen to them and understand why that is the situation. And they benefit from it tremendously.
This is interesting. And tell us about the story. What was the shift from, completing agronomy, going to Lebanon, and then coming back for master's in international business, and then again PhD at Cornell?
Well, I think I mentioned we wanted to go do something after we got married while we were young. So we went to Lebanon now. So we saw an opportunity with a certain Christian mission. They needed volunteers. So we volunteered. We went with them. We didn't do anything like what we volunteered for.
Right.
Nothing, because the war started and everything shifted to emergency operations. That was okay, but it was a bit tense, to say the least. We came back in '87, and that's when I went and I met my brother. We were figuring out what to do. I was doing these odd jobs, and my brother said to me, "You should go to get an MBA. Have you thought about that?" Never crossed my mind. Agriculture, mission work, relief work. You don't think of doing an MBA. That's those guys. I look at MBA people you hit for money, not to go do something. So I said, why you say that? He said, you're good at solving problems. And being an MBA is really about problem solving. You just need the tools. So my other brother, second brother, looked at me and he said, I don't know anything about MBA. He's an economist. I don't know about MBA, but if you want to go to an MBA school, here's a check. He wrote me a check for $10,000, handed it to me and said, go. This is what brothers do, right? So he said, if and when you can pay me back, you can. If not, nope, don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it. So I took that $10,000 and we went and enrolled in an MBA program in South Carolina, international MBA program. That program had an internship, required internship overseas because it's an international MBA program. So again, we were supposed to go to the Middle East. Another war broke out. That was canceled. And they sent us to London. So I spent 6 months in London working in a financial district. Very interesting experience. Very interesting to see how things work in the trading. We're trading oil shipments. I worked for a Conoco oil company. So we're trading futures, the oil futures, all this kind of stuff. It was very interesting to me, but it was very mechanical, mathematical.
You have to sit on the desk.
Routine.
Huh?
To me, it was routine. Huh. Exciting, big numbers, lots of people, big trading, but it was almost a routine job to me. And so I worked with the vice president to try to develop how to manage their currency across Europe. So it was fascinating. And he actually called me in to work on this project while I was there. Usually the interns, they put in some cubicle and you check somebody else's numbers for us, just let you play with something, Nice. So he let me work on this project. He wanted to hire me. He said, can I hire you? He couldn't. Because it was the European Conoco office. I would have to go back to the U.S. and get hired in the U.S. office and then get a transfer. He said, it will take a year. You'll get another job. But he said, if I could hire you, I would have hired you. So that was an interesting experience. And so we had an interesting time in London and had a lot of good memories from that as well. Our kids were young. They were having fun. Then we went back. So I finally did the master's degree, finished with the master's degree. In 1991, the economy was low. No jobs. So one company called me and they said, we'd like to hire you to help us advise us. This was a company based in Kuwait. And they were doing educational materials, educational training, like you do here in India. A lot of people study for SAT tests and they're trying to get abroad, something like that. So they had a big program in Kuwait and Syria and different countries. So this office called me. They said, we'd like you to advise us on how to do this. So I said, that's fine. I went to and advised them. I wrote a nice report on what they should do. And the key piece of the report was, you need to hire a local to run the office. Your local office is being run by a foreigner who doesn't understand the local situation.
Right.
That's one of the big problems you're having. So they said, oh, that's very interesting. Would you like the job? I said, no. You didn't read my report. Read the rest of my report. You need a local. I'm not a local either. I just could see what needed to be done. So it just struck me as, really? You hired me to write a report, a consulting report. I gave you the report, and then you just try to hire me to do the job. Do what I'm suggesting. Why didn't you do that? It was fascinating to me to see how businesses think, and they just take the short answer, the shortcut. So I turned that. I didn't know. I don't want that job. To me, it was dishonest. I would be against my own advice, taking a job. How could I do that? So, and I didn't want it anyway. So I left that and just started doing some consulting on my own. I ended up in Ohio, as I said, at this farm, ended up working at Procter Gamble. From Procter Gamble, I met a professor who we brought actually to me and this guy, Larry, brought to Procter Gamble to teach us about some new ways of thinking and doing product development. His name was Joseph Novak. Dr. Novak was a professor at Cornell. While I met him at working at Procter & Gamble doing this projects, he said, why don't you come do a PhD with me at Cornell? Okay. I was very interested because his was all about problem solving and how people think.
And also the role of cooperation in high-tech firms. That was your PhD.
I ended up PhD being in that. So I ended up being that. So when I got to Cornell, a very funny thing happened. He retired. Although after 1 year, I finally got to Cornell. There was a long story how I got accepted to Cornell. I arrived there. He retired and left after 1 week. So I fortunately had spent time working with him and studying his books, and I knew what he was about. And I adopted this thing that he uses of concept mapping to learn and teach people to learn.
What is that? Can you dive?
So you draw, anyone who's taken my class knows this, the maps, I require them to make these maps. So concept maps are just putting concepts together in bubbles, connecting them with lines and words, and it makes a model of what your thinking is. Okay. It's a thinking model. So he used this to teach children and found out they learn much better and much more when they're taught in this manner. And I worked with him to developing these ideas in the business application. So how can people in business benefit from this also? So that's what I was doing. And that's where I got into my PhD on high-tech firms and how they manage. And I got involved in game theory and people's behavior and playing all kinds of problem solving. Very interesting stuff. So I was able to finish that and get done with other professors that I met at Cornell and I'd used on my committee. He retired in Florida. I visited him a few times. He passed away this last year, I'm sad to say. A wonderful man. And if you look up concept mapping now, you can Google it. You will find Wikipedia sites and all about all his work. He's very well known for being the father of this.
So if anybody wants to learn this idea of concept mapping, he's the person to
just look up Joseph Novak, Novak, and concept mapping. You will find him everywhere in the schools and educational materials primarily. In business and in universities, it's a little bit slower because they're a little bit closed-minded to things that are new, It takes a little longer for things to seep in. I'll give you another interesting story. When I went to Cornell to do my PhD, remember Novak left, so I joined some other professors in the Industrial and Labor Relations School. It's next to the business school. And I told them I want to do my PhD on knowledge management. How people learn and organizations learn and all these things, and using these tools of Novak concept mapping. They said, that's not a real field. You need to study economics, labor, management, something.
The traditional things.
Yeah, that's not a real field. That's just a consulting thing. You know that Cornell today has a professor endowed chair of knowledge management in the same college.
Crazy.
But when I went there, that's not a real field. Yeah. I said, I think it is. So not much was going on in this field. I said, I think I'm going to. So let me tell you funny how this came out to NASA, because you asked about NASA. So I pushed and got my PhD. It wasn't titled knowledge management, but that's what it was. How people learn and how they use these things. Focused on high-tech firms. So when I left Cornell. I got a job in Alabama teaching in a university. I was there 3 years. After I'd been there a couple of years, I saw this ad for this position at NASA. I took it home and I showed it to my wife. I said, look, this ad wants someone with a PhD from a top school in knowledge management. So there's probably 2 people in the United States who do that, who can say that's true. Because it's not even a field. They don't know what they're asking. I said, I might be the only person in the United States who actually qualifies for this position. Ivy League school, PhD in knowledge management, because I had to push mine. They didn't want to let me have it in that 2 field. So I said, okay, apply. So I just applied. And there's a funny story how they finally got selected. And I was hired by NASA in May of 2003, which was just a few months after the Columbia accident.
Oh.
So that had a lot of coloring to my first months in NASA, as the whole organization was suffering through the lessons of that tragedy. And it also created a lot of opportunities for me to get involved quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So
because it was a period of crisis and everybody was figuring out what to do and stuff.
They wanted answers. And they're smart people, very smart. They realize they're engineers, they're scientists. We are not business people. That's why we hired you. You tell us what to do in these situations. We don't know what to do. And so that's why they wanted someone with a PhD from an Ivy League school. So you could hold your own. You weren't just some consultant doubting something that there's no backing to. I could produce research. I could convince them. I could show them this is what I'm talking about. And I think that was smart. Actually, looking back, that was a smart move. Because those people have PhDs in engineering, physics, and all that. They're going to question things.
Right.
You better know what you're talking about.
Two things here, Professor. Number one, you mentioned, you were working with, and of course, no doubt, at NASA, these are all smart people.
Pretty much.
What's the problem with these smart people? Number two, you also mentioned that, so as a chief knowledge officer, one of your work is to figure out the learnings from all the fuzzy projects that they do and then convert back those learnings, create case studies and, so that they can be feed into the system back. Give us an example of a fuzzy project like this. And how did you derive learnings from those projects? And how did you create case studies and created this model where people can learn from it? And we can pick both of any of the things in one by one.
So let me talk to your question about smart people. When I went to interview at NASA, you're right on target. So I went to interview at NASA, being a position in the top level. I had to have a final interview with the director. He had to sign off. So I met all the other people and did the interviews. In the afternoon, it took me for a meeting with the director in the top floor, waiting in his big office. My handler took me and sat me down with the director. It's like 15 minutes, right? Token interview. So he'd ask me, well, what do you think so far? He doesn't know what to say. So I said, I think you have a lot of smart people here and you have a hard time getting them to work together. And the guy looked at me and said, what kind of an answer is that? The director was like, So we chatted for a few minutes, then we left. Later, they offered me the job. And my boss came to me. He said, when you, in the interview with the director and you gave that answer, I thought, oh man, he's finished. Speaking like this to the director. But when we left your office, I put you in the elevator to go down. He came running out of his office. Hire this guy. He knows our problem. He knows exactly our problem. We have too many smart people and getting them to work together. So he said, he knows our problem. Maybe he can do something. So they immediately selected me. That was the reason they selected me. And he thought I was out for giving a sassy answer. I was just trying to be honest. You asked me, this is what I see. You have a lot of smart people. They need to work together and it's hard.
Why it's hard for smarter people to work together?
There's several reasons. Students who've taken my class know I always give them this article, Teaching Smart People How to Learn by Chris Rodgers, 1989 Harvard Business Review. Famous article. And it's a little tricky to read, but basically he covers these points. And that's why I give them the reading. But people who are smart, that we say are smart, generally we mean well-educated, advanced degrees, know a lot of material. They're not so familiar with failure. And so it's difficult. And so learning becomes hard when things don't go well. It's generally hard to acknowledge that maybe I didn't do something right. Maybe I actually failed here because in school and tests and all that, I was doing very, very well, topping everything. And now I'm with a lot of people who are smart. I'm not necessarily, I'm average. You're a smart guy from MIT, you go to NASA, you're average.
Because everybody is from the top colleges.
Yeah, exactly. So you feel a little different. And it makes it hard for you to accept that maybe I got it wrong and I'm the problem. It makes it difficult to learn. People push back a lot. And he talks about this in the article, Chris Rodgers. Consultants, top firm, they all blame the customer, right? This didn't work because the customer did this, customer did that, customer did that, customer did that. It's hard to look and see, what did we do? What should we look at? So opening these ideas to the smart people leaders and getting them to able to talk about it can be helpful. I'll give you an example now about a case. So we had a mission, big mission, several hundreds of millions of dollars, that was having lots of trouble.
Because?
engineering trouble, communications trouble, all the usuals. So these kinds of troubles, teamwork troubles, coordination, people's issues, all this kind of stuff. Scientists with big egos, whatever, all the typical things you have in these projects. So I went to go talk to them about making a case study. No way they want to talk to me. Why are you talking to us? And the reason they gave me was, our mission, we had troubles, but we launched it. It's working. It didn't fail. So why are you here? You only talk to people who fail. I said, no. We want to talk to people who do things to show how they succeeded, how they got it. So he didn't want to talk to me because he said, you're going to make my mission into a big failure story. I don't want to talk to you. So I went to the director. I said, this guy won't talk to me. He said, well, actually, his mission was almost canceled twice, meaning they boxed up a review. They had to go to headquarters and defend his project, or that will be canceled, totally zeroed out. So, and the director told me when they did that, I was on the board reviewing his project. So I said, fine, I'm going to tell him that you want me to write a case study about how he survived a cancellation review. Okay. I said, yeah, okay, do that. So I went back to this guy. I said, I'm here from the director's office. And he wants me to write a case study about how you were able to survive a cancellation review and your project survived to go on and become successful. He goes, oh, I can do that. So he wrote the case study. They use it in training for years. Same points, but just couched differently. Not a failure, not a what went wrong, but how do you accomplish something? So you have to play these games because people don't want to be held up as a bad example. Even though they may have made mistakes or done things that they could fix, you want to show how they learned and what they did. And then they become involved. They become engaged. So in this way, you're able to get a lot of case studies you wouldn't have otherwise gotten. Because you can't force them. If you force them, then you're an investigator. Nobody wants a police investigator. You have to be partners with them.
Makes sense. But by the way, what were certain things that he said to the review board which made the project go on?
Well, they had to promise what they're going to do. So you have a new budget, you get overcosts. You need to convince them that you're actually able to do what you're saying. Because you took a budget in the first place, you said you'd do it, it didn't work. So now convince us you're giving another $50 million, 6 more months. Tell us why that will make it succeed when before it didn't succeed. So you don't just go in there and say, give me money. I have a good project. You need to convince them how you're going to do something different. So you need to think about how you operate. And that makes you think about what was I doing before that I thought I was doing well, but I wasn't. So I need to fix something, not just do more of the same.
It's a very complex thing what they do at NASA. And there are a couple of points there. Number one is, you're taking off from a planet, landing on a different planet, bringing something back, orbiting certain things. Help us understand the level of complexity that, they face at NASA. And how did you, learn all those things? What was most shocking thing for you while working over there?
Well, I didn't have to learn all the technical things. I had to learn enough to be competent. So I'll give you a secret, my big secret. When I reached NASA, I went out and bought a book, NASA for Dummies. I'm dead serious. And I read the book from cover to cover. What I wanted was the lingo, the words, the names of the missions, years the missions were founded. They know all this stuff. They lived there for years. So if you don't know that stuff, then it's not worth their time to explain something to you. I didn't have to learn everything about physics. I learned the basics. How they find exoplanets. I studied a few things just so you can make some conversation and then they respect you. And like learning a language. We talked about earlier.
Yes.
You're relatable. So you know the language that they're using and you can understand it without having them to explain to you. So I did that. And it was very helpful. But these missions have a lot of pieces to them.
Mm-hmm.
So as you know, engineers are very good at breaking things down in small pieces. So then you fix this, you fix this, you fix this. But then comes the problem, you have to put it all back together.
Yes.
So where the rub comes is when you build what they call integration and test. So you assemble all the pieces you've built for your satellite, your mission, you put them all together and you test it. Is it going to actually work? Because each piece may have worked, but how do you know the whole thing is going to actually work? And it's going to work in space. So you test it in a vacuum chamber, in temperatures that are cold or hot or whatever you're going to be like, and you have to prove to see whether it will actually function. And some things don't make it. Some things break. They find out it wasn't sufficient. or something major, something minor, and they fix it. So that integration part becomes really critical.
So, Professor, you mentioned that, there are scientists with big egos. And, in academicians also, there are some professors who have, they're hard to deal with. What do you do in such situation? How do you deal with the egos of such reputed folks? Because these are people in power, these are people in position, and at the end, these are the smartest people. They know their subject so well, but there is some kind of ego. What do you do in this situation?
So they're not the only ones who have big egos, obviously. There are people in business and everywhere who have big egos, so I'm not trying to pick on them by any means whatsoever. But when you have a person in charge of a large mission who is doing their work, they tend to want to do it their way. And a project manager, for example, will learn you're going to get things done if you have to compromise with people getting things done, on deadlines and budgets and priorities. You need to get the final deliverable done, but there may be more than one way to get there. People who are owning a project of their own, say a scientist or academician, like you said, can be sort of inflexible. Mm-hmm. Because they see it as their one chance. I'm heading this mission. This mission may get me my Nobel Prize if we discover something, right? Something like that. And so it's understandable. So what I tried to do was I would go and visit these people. I would just go to their office, even uninvited, and I would knock on the door. Some threw me out. Some told me I'm too busy. Some I would see and I'd sit down with them. And I would talk to them and I would try to show them that the idea here is for us to all learn. The idea isn't to find some fault. And that actually taps into something that's very core to them, which is learning. Because that's why they wanted to be a scientist in the first place, right? To discover something, to learn something. So I would tap into that vein. This is also about learning how we can do these things better, how we can get better results from your team, from your people, how you can train more scientists to do more work you're doing. Then you become partners with them. So I never battled with these people.
So, for example, you've identified something. This is the person that you want to create a case study on or something. How do you ensure? Because for the first time, he is a stranger to you.
Yes.
So what's the way of getting the maximum knowledge from some stranger in order to, create those knowledge?
You have to get them to talk to you.
How do you do that?
So you need to demonstrate, one, you're not threatening. So as I mentioned, I'm not here to find fault and write up a report about you.
Right.
I'm here to actually help. And then you have to demonstrate how you're going to actually help. So I went to one project guy's office. His project was having some difficulties. I knew that because I worked for the director, right? I went to his office, sat down. He said, "Why are you here?" I said, "I'm here, you're the knowledge management guy, right?" He goes, "Yeah." So he said, "You want me," this is the project manager speaking, "you want me to spend time helping you gather some ideas, some lessons, something we did, something here and there, that's going to help some other project after me do a better job. How is that going to help my project on cost, schedule, and deliverable this month? Everything you're doing is helping somebody else. Why? It's no benefit to me whatsoever." That was his challenge. So I sat and talked to him and said, "I think you probably have some things to learn from the things that are happening in your project as well. And that would be useful for you to learn now, real time, what's happening, not just storing something for somebody else to read or watch later." He said, "Well, we'll see." So within about a week after I'd visited this project manager, their project had an incident, a safety incident. They almost blew something up in the test chamber. This was very serious. And so they got called for a stand down. They called me. Of course, the director called me and said, "Ed, go make a stand down for them." That's my job. So I went to the director of engineering, who I knew, and we had another mission that had just had a failure based on some similar, simple human misunderstandings and failure to communicate had resulted in the failure of this other relatively small mission, but another mission. And this director of engineering knew that story. We had just finished it. So I said, "Come to this group, tell them the story and the idea that you don't want to become like them. You don't want another story written about because of some lack of coordination, lack of human understanding, lack of teamwork, whatever you want to call it, all these things. That's the reason your mission's going to fail." The director of engineering came and told the story. Hearing it from him, they paid attention. If I came there and just told him story, it'd be like, being like tisk, 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 something, naughty people or something. But you get the director of engineering, and he knew that because I'd worked with him already. So he was on my side. He understood if we tell these stories to people, then they can learn from them. So he came, did all that. The team listened for the day. This project manager of that project, by the way, became one of my biggest fans. He told you need this guy. He will help you. He became convinced. So it takes this willingness to prove it. I asked many times, why don't you have the director write you a memo saying all projects should listen to you for such and such, such and such. I said, that'll never work. And they will hate my guts. They'll see me coming, they'll lock the door. Just like someone from HR, safety coming, quality coming to give them more work. In fact, I told my boss when I got hired, he said, for your first year, what will be your requirements of achievement? I thought, 1 year, I didn't think I could accomplish anything. I told him it would take at least 3 years to make any difference. So I said, in 1 year, a project manager will ask me to come help them. He laughed. He said, they never ask, not for more help. The project manager doesn't say, send me more safety people. Send me more auditors. We don't have enough auditors on my project. They never ask for that. They tell those people to go away. They want more engineers, more. He said, no, I said, a project manager will call you, my boss, and ask, I need Ed to come help my project. And that happened. 1 year later, he called me into his office. He said, this project manager just called. They want you to come help. I said, see? So I had to spend the time to build the relationship with these people. And that's why I said it'd take 3 years to do anything.
And how do you build those relationships with these people?
You have to connect with them.
How do you connect with them?
You go and talk to them. You see what they're doing. You understand their language and understand what their pain is. And you have to bring some benefit to the table. So I'll give you a story from Procter Gamble when I was working with Mr. Houston in the business world. So we used to have these ideation meetings. So he worked for the vice president of research, all research and development for Procter Gamble. So they'd have these ideation meetings. They'd call their head scientists, top inventors for a meeting, and get consultants would come in with sticky notes, right? And they'd throw things all over the board trying to gab ideas. So he booked one of these. He wanted me to facilitate. So I was helping him do this. So he booked this meeting, and I'm calling these guys to remind them to come to this meeting because it was difficult to get them to come. They're working in their laboratories. They don't want to come spend 2 hours. So I called this guy. I came into the office early. It was like 6 a.m. So I called him, thinking I'll leave a message. He picks up the phone. I said, this is, I'm calling from Larry's office. I'm trying to make sure you're coming to the meeting at 2 o'clock, whatever, blah, blah, this ideation session. Want to generate some new ideas. He said, why should I come to that? I learned nothing. I get no benefit whatsoever from coming to this meeting. You guys take our ideas, you promote the bad ones, you never ask us again, and we have no choice. There's no benefit for you to coming. Click. So I called him back and I said, we're going to do some things a little differently. We want to involve your thinking. Give it a try. And that's where I got Novak, this Professor Novak, who'd come to visit. And we used his techniques of making concept maps. And we had the scientists together build a map of their knowledge, joint knowledge. Now they learn something from each other, which we facilitated, rather than skim some idea off of them, take it myself and go develop it at their loss, my benefit, which is what people saw him doing previously. We were actually conducting a meeting in which you will get smarter by attending. The guys came and said, this is the first meeting we ever attended like this that was worth the time. Tell me when the next one is. So that's how you change people's perceptions. But we had to change what we're doing. We had to not stop trying to take ideas from them, let them build ideas. That's where Novak talks about. Helping people build knowledge makes them smarter. If you make people smarter, you get smarter. Everybody wins.
This is so insightful for me because, we have to convince a lot of entrepreneurs, institutional builders to kind of do this because this is kind of knowledge creation for younger entrepreneurs.
Yes.
We try to talk to different folks. We try to see what were the problems that they faced in, while building a product, while, hiring people, while building a team. And through this thing, I also remember that you say that NASA is not in the business of space missions. What do you mean by that? Can you double click on that?
So I did a presentation for the directorate one time about what am I doing? And in that presentation, I made this statement: NASA is not in the space business. He said, what do you mean? Of course we are. I said, no, you're in the business of making projects. Those projects happen to be in space. But the business you do is you assemble a team, you take a budget, you build some hardware, and you launch it. Now they get science and get results from the mission. That's the mission aspect. But your business, then you'll do another project. You won't do another mission exactly the same as that one to the same planet, but you'll build another project You'll build another team. You'll build another hardware. You'll do all that stuff you'll repeat. That's your business. That's your assembly line. So you need to be able to do it well and over again. Whereas each mission is different. Don't focus on the mission, focus on the process. You are building projects. And so if we're not good at that, then we're not going to be successful.
And in the process, the main thing is building teams.
You have to build a team.
If you have to give 5 important things, anybody who wish to build a team, what are those 5 or 3 or 5 team building
Let me
lists?
tell you the first one, the most important. I don't have a list in my head, but I'll tell you the number one. You have to invest in your team from the beginning.
How do you invest in teams?
You spend time. Number 2, they don't think they can actually do anything.
So you have to make them believe that they can do it.
So you need to impart some of the basic skills of how you build teams. Simple stuff. Doesn't matter what you do. You can pick any number of ideas for team building. That's not the point. The point is do something, be committed to it, and make it happen. Because you will need your team at some point. The best example we use in the course, by the way, Managing Complexity, is an Everest expedition. So these guys get a team of people, tourists. They try to go up to Everest, and they run into trouble. They find out they have no team. It all falls apart, and many of them die. You can't ring up your team on demand. So once you're in the middle of trouble, say, oh, now we're in the middle of this big problem. I need everybody to be committed. It's too late. That's what happened on the Everest team. They invested in skills, climbing skills, food, equipment, radios, all that technology, but they got up there, they had no team. When things got pushed and shoved, every man for himself. And they just perished. It happens a lot. That's what I mean by investing early. And if you don't have skills, learn some skills. Or get a partner with you in the project who can balance you. And NASA would do this quite often, by the way.
How?
They would get a project manager and a deputy project manager with complementary skills. One may be super technical, one may be a little bit more on the team side, so they could work together rather than one person. That's a typical approach. That would help.
You spoke about managing complexities. Walk us through some period of crisis where, everybody was, in the moment trying to solve, and some of your knowledge principle kind of helped. What were some of the most complex situations at NASA? And of course, in your classroom as a teacher?
Managing complexity, as I teach it, is often not meant to be used as sort of emergency operations.
Okay.
The reason being, when you're in emergency operations, you're responding by reflex, instinct, or prescribed protocols. So imagine you're at NASA and some disaster happens. They have protocols for safing, what you do first, like an EMT, emergency people have for when they have an accident, or what they do first, how they stabilize the patient, things you should do first. You don't book a conference room and have a discussion. You just move and act. And so what you've learned will determine how you respond. Like those highly trained Navy SEAL people, they get in situations that are very difficult. They respond instinctively to what's in front of them because they've been trained for that. So that's a little different environment. And people do the same when they get pressured in business. So a project manager gets pushed to the wall. He might respond violently or start shouting at people or doing some other default behavior that he's learned instinctively in the past. That might come out. And that's where you need to say, do we need to stop and think about what we're doing here? So a lot of leaders will think, they'll say things like, well, I don't understand because my door is always open. So I would say to them, your door may be open, but nobody is coming in it. Does that mean one of two things? They have no problems to discuss with you, or nobody wants to discuss their problem with you?
Two different things.
He said, yeah, those are possible. I said, tell me which one it is. I don't know. That's your problem. You only see doorway with nobody in it, and you assume there's no problems. People may be afraid to come to that door because the last guy who came out had blood on his face, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? Not really, but got beat up or shouted at or something like that. And people do that, and they have no idea that there's a connection between, I shouted at the last, he was stupid. He brought a dumb idea. So I told him so. Okay, what does the next guy think? I'll just sit quietly and do my job. They don't see a connection between those. So these are very simple things. You point them out, they get the idea. So that's on the negative side. Equally true is on the encouragement side. All humans need encouragement. But when we get intellectual, we tend to think that's just emotions. They aren't necessary.
So it's a 20-hour course, and we can't distill that everything in this podcast. But you teach so many case studies. If you have to distill 5 learning, imagine you're not the professor of the course, you're a student of a course. And after going through that, if you have to distill everything into 3 or 5 wisdom nuggets, what those would be?
Yeah, okay. There's a couple of nuggets because I say them in the course. One of them is, if you don't understand how you made a decision, you won't learn much from it. Doesn't matter whether it was right or wrong, you won't learn much from it. So learning how to understand how I'm making a decision. So simple example, you might be on a project that's behind schedule and out of money. Something comes along and say, we need to push it. We need to push it. So I'm just saying, you are making a decision based on haste. Maybe that's valid. Maybe that's invalid. But later, don't say you made a good decision based on technology. Your decision was based on haste. And admit that. Maybe there's a time for that. That time is important. Client is leaving. Okay, push, get it done. But recognize that's why we made the decision. If you make the decision based on, well, safety would say we should redo this project and take 1 more week, then the reason for your decision is safety, not because I want to charge more or want to run up the bill or anything else. This is the reason, and make that true and stick by it. When you evaluate your decision, then you can evaluate. We made the decision based on speed or safety or technical. Did that turn out to be the reason we needed to do it?
Understanding the process, understanding why you made that decision.
You can learn from it, because what we do is we justify. We make a decision, afterwards something happens. Oh, customer was doing something, hey, there was no time, he brought the wrong material. We'll fill in some excuse. Nothing to do with me, always something to do with somebody else.
And that's where also, the importance of documenting everything.
That's the second part. Okay. You have to see your decision. So that's why I teach them how to make these concept maps. If you just store it here, it will change.
True.
You will adapt it to fit your own narrative, especially one that's positive about you. But if you actually draw it out, these are the things we're considering. We consider this like a map, this and this. These things pointed us to do this decision, tuck it away. After the decision, come back and say, this is what pointed, oh, we forgot this. This became a late thing and it overshadowed all of this and changed the direction. I understand why. It didn't happen the way we thought. Or if it did happen the way we thought, okay, this is important. Next time we should consider these points in our other decisions. But you have that there in front of you. If you don't, I don't call it documenting, make a map of it. Doesn't have to take a lot of time, big documentation. 5-10 minutes. What are the key pieces that drive it? What drove this decision? Be honest about it. And when you write it down in a map, it sticks. And then you can learn from it. That's the third thing. Learn from every decision you make.
Mm-hmm.
If you learn from just the decisions you make, you will go so much faster than most people. Most people don't learn from their own decisions, and they don't learn much from other people's decisions either.
Which is more important?
Both are important, but they don't learn either. Very few. They only learn from major things that someone else did that they have to read. Some big disaster or something. And even then, they might learn the wrong lessons. If you can learn from all your decisions, of course, important one decisions, you can grow and get smarter on a trajectory that will surpass most of your colleagues. Make sure I learned something from it. Whether it worked or whether it didn't work, I can still learn.
And that requires a lot of contemplation and free time.
Not a lot. A little bit. Minutes. But it takes a determination to be willing to do it in a timely manner.
It is one of the toughest decisions that you made. And what was the reflection after it, and what was the learning from that decision? During your time at NASA, or during your time, any time?
Let me tell a personal story. My wife and I were looking for a house. We needed to move from Ohio to upstate New York, where I was going to enter the PhD program at Cornell. At the time, we had 3-4 small children, and it was hundreds of miles away. So to go there and look for a house was very expensive and time-consuming. We went 2 or 3 times, could not find a house to buy, could not agree on it, how this was the best choice. We saw so many houses, all types and shapes. Finally, I went back home, sat down, I said, we have a problem. We are not seeing what we're thinking. So I gave my wife a piece of paper. I took a piece of paper and I said, make a map of what a house is. What does a house mean to you? What is the model of house in your head? House has, kitchen, living room, bedroom, bathroom, dining room, garden, park, car park, garage, garden, whatever it has. Put all those things in a map and see how it fits. And I'll make the same one. So I made a map, my house. She made a map, my house. And then we looked at them. They had almost nothing in common. So we realized, number one, just by this simple exercise of making what's in my head visible, we could see that we had two completely different models. We weren't looking for one house. We were looking for two houses, but in the same house. Not possible. So it became apparent to us. Now we can see it. That's what I mean by making your thinking visible. By seeing it, then we can say, okay, let's assume, which I did, that we want to live in the same house, not two different houses. So let's make one map together, your ideas and my ideas, negotiate, compromise, discuss, and realize our goal is to make one map that says our house. What will that be like? We did. We made a map. It took some time, some negotiations. We went back to New York. Immediately we found out because we're looking for one thing. We found out that fit those criteria. That's it. We bought it. Done.
Bringing people on the same page is very important before doing anything together.
Getting them to visualize their thinking is what breaks through.
Managing complexities is often what makes great separates from the exceptional leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of budding leaders, or there are a lot of young folks who want to become exceptional leaders, but they won't be able to attend your class. So for them, what would you advise for those young entrepreneurs who want to make exceptional leaders, and what would be your advice to them to learn the art of managing complexities?
But simply what they can do is learn to express your models, articulate your model of thinking, practice showing people what you think. Doesn't matter how you do it. You don't have to do exactly the way I do it. I'm teaching one technique. Whatever works. If that works, use it. But we try to explain things to people. And especially when you're talking about designs or projects or schedules or things like that, show it to them as much as possible. Because we don't pay attention to what we say as much as we think we do.
I am in the same business of convincing people to document their knowledge for younger folks. That was one thing that you were trying to do at NASA. Give me more insights on how did you convince folks in order to, give their knowledge to you, and, then you created them for the younger folks. Some advice on those lines.
So a couple of tips. One, I mentioned to you, you have to build a relationship on some ground.
Yes.
So I had to find something common from my side, not expect them to come to mine. So I found something common with them. I learned what they're doing, understood their project, something that you can connect with. So you need that opening. Or sometimes you get an introduction. As you know, that's how it works.
Yes.
So something that you can touch on. You need that. Then you need some kind of benefit. So what's the purpose of this? It can be different for different people. It can be a benefit of learning something. It can be a benefit of helping other people. People are motivated by different things. So you have all those things. And the third thing is you need to show, so what? How does it actually achieve that? So who has watched your show and learned something and said, I watched your show, I changed my plan, and my model of business took off?
Mm.
It's hard to point to. I know you'll say that's difficult to do.
Yes.
But you'll find some snips and bits where you can point to that and you can show how it's related. Because then people say, okay, this is a complete circle.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand the role I'm playing. You have A, B, C. If you have me, the circle becomes complete. That makes me feel very like that's useful. It's useful for me to do that. The thing I would do at NASA is I would make it easy for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I met with this one executive. She was telling me, I was meeting with her to come to a training course and help me with a case study as a teacher, part of the class. She said, you're trying to make me into a professor. I said, no, I don't need you to be a professor. I just need you to come with me for 1 hour. I'll be the professor. You be the teacher. They'll ask you for you're the expert, right? You know the answers, but I facilitate, and I would do that. So even the director. So you know how it sometimes is in these classrooms or situations, some big VIP comes. So in my case, the director himself comes. I bring him to the class. I introduce him, give him his resume, his background. We're so honored to have, et cetera, et cetera. Here is our director, the very own, our only, blah, blah, blah. And he comes up. I would stand next to him. I didn't sit down. People say, you introduced him and you stood in his space. He's speaking now. I said, no, he's not speaking. It's my class. He's my guest, like I'm the guest on your show. You don't introduce me and then go sit over there and let me talk. It's a discussion. And people would ask questions and I would interrupt them and say, that's a good question. Let's put that with another question from here. And what do you think about that? Now, really, what happened when you were on that project? I knew all the background of his projects. I knew how to guide, you're on a talk show. He understood, and others who came understood, I'm making them look good because I'm making them more effective. They're not good teachers. They don't know how to give a lecture. They get off the points. They go on a wild chase about some detailed thing for 10, 15 minutes that's irrelevant. I would bring them back. Well, let's leave that and come back to the point here. Audience recognizes that I'm adding more value. So they said, this was useful. My hour spent sitting in the class was useful. My hour spent going as an executive to spend with these people was useful. You made it beneficial. We see the benefit. If you have another class, call me.
Just wanted to touch on one more thing. You mentioned you make them look good.
Yes.
How do you make them look good, and how can I make my guests look good?
So making them look good doesn't mean making them buttered up, fancy. I mean, making it look good like I'm effective. So you're asking good questions that I can tell stories to, and that I like telling stories, and I think they illustrate things well. So you've led me on to tell stories that I found useful. Those stories will help people. So then I feel like I've done my part. So you help them be effective. It's not a matter of helping them look fancy or sharp, good looking. It's a matter of being effective. Look good, like this was well spent. If these people came to my course and they listened to it, they would want to come back tomorrow.
Wow. So here's the last part of the podcast. Yep. This is a rapid fire round where you have to quickly answer.
Okay, I may not have answers to all your questions. That's okay. I can
skip one question.
I can skip one. Oh, man, I may have passed more than one.
Sure. What's the most coolest part of working at NASA? You have to answer in one word or one line.
I'd say meeting the people who do the projects. So I know the faces behind those projects.
Lovely. What was your most favorite project? Which kind of inspired you?
Most favorite project that inspired me? Probably Hubble.
Okay.
So long, so many fixes, so many stories, so many people I knew who worked on it over the years.
How do you think NASA and SpaceX are different? And do you think SpaceX is beating NASA?
SpaceX has a different mantra. SpaceX is different. They use tried and proven technology. NASA wants to do something new and adventurous. So they have a sort of different divergence there, what they're after. SpaceX will build something that's reusable, solid steel, proven, won't break. NASA wants to build the latest and greatest, push the edge, push the envelope. So those are different mantras. And so it results in different outcomes. Beating each other, they're not doing each other's work. In fact, SpaceX is supporting NASA. NASA doesn't have to do what SpaceX can do cheaper, so they can do other things. That's helping them.
What is one thing that the Indian Space Agency can learn from NASA?
I think they need to learn how to involve the private sector, especially entrepreneurs and startups, more. They need to build a bigger ecosystem of space in India, space industry. They're doing some things. I spoke at NASCOM last year about this and gave a talk on this very subject. How do you build a space ecosystem in India? So the goal of an Indian startup's space company isn't to go do business in the West. That's where the money is. They don't see the opportunity here. They'll make contracts to sell to Europe and US rather than sell to India.
We're very amazing space startup. In fact, we are hosting a couple of founders. So there is this company called Pixel. There is this company called Skyroot.
I know that.
They are doing amazing work, and hopefully, yes. What is one thing that the NASA should learn from Indian Space Agency?
From Indian Space Agency, probably needs to learn a little bit of more humility.
Okay.
What can we do? What we can't do? I think NASA sometimes they're put on a pedestal. NASA went to the moon. They can do anything. That kind of expression, and it can sometimes sink into yourself. There are people there who are very humble. I mean, I met many of them, but as an agency at the political level, we're partners. We're not here because we're better than everybody. Sometimes I think that image comes across.
What's your most favorite movie? I know that you use a lot of movie clips in your class slides, but what's your most favorite Bollywood movie?
The most favorite one to me is really Three Idiots.
Okay.
I think it's just an absolutely fantastic movie that comments on culture, college students, business professors, all the things I'm involved in. And it's just brilliant. I have it practically memorized. Definition kya hai? Kya baat hai?
What's your most favorite Indian food?
My most favorite Indian food. I probably like the best like Madras meals. Tamil Nadu, Pakka vegetarian meals. And you know why? Because I live there the most.
You eat with hands on banana leaf?
Hands on banana leaf, the whole 9 yards. And not spicy. It's not spicy. It's not chili. They don't use chilies in Tamil Nadu. Not like Andhra Pradesh.
What's your most favorite? You have traveled India extensively. What's your most favorite part?
Most favorite part of India?
Or a travel destination?
Well, I like taking my wife to Mysore in Kerala. So from Bangalore, we traveled by road down south through Mysore in Kerala, and then we went into Tamil Nadu. So I think this whole mountain area of the southern Ghats was a beautiful area between Kerala and Ooty and Kodaikanal and Bangalore. That's where I spent most of my time.
What is one thing that Indians need to improve on based on the time that you have spent in India? What is one thing that you want us to improve on?
Indians need to improve on?
Yes.
I think they need to continue. They are improving already. They need to continue improving on giving themselves credit for their thinking ability. They're very good at recall, passing tests, slamming quizzes, tests, nailing case studies. But their thinking ability is actually, I think, and proven by the number of Indians running the McKinsey, Pepsi-Cola companies around the world, even running for president of the United States, who knows? The thinking ability is by far underestimated. And I think it's because other people underestimate it. Sometimes we Indians, if I may use the word, underestimate ourselves.
Yes.
I think if we begin to get off of that, we'll combine the skills and capabilities with the thinking ability. No barriers left to Indians.
This was an important one. Tell us about a complicated situation which happened in your class, which you will never forget.
If I'm visiting my class,
Yes.
I had a class on a case study I was teaching, and in the class showed up an executive, and this executive shows up and sits in the front row. So in the class, I had structured them to read the case study for 5-10 minutes and discuss it with each other. Then we will have a group discussion. The same way I do it in the class, like an executive training. This guy sits in the front. He picks up the case study, puts it down. Like, I know everything. I'm waiting. We start to have the discussion. He starts to just get up and start telling things. Like, that's not how it happened. This is how it happened. After 2 or 3 of these, I said, excuse me, this is my classroom.
Not yours.
Not your classroom. I want to hear from this person. He was just monopolizing, that situation. So I let this person, he sat down kind of. So another person spoke gently. Somebody else spoke. And I kept calling on them. I didn't wait for them to raise their hand. Just, what do you think? Just drawing out the audience. We had a good discussion. He sat there like this. Somebody came to me and said, do you know who that was? He said, no, I don't care. Wasn't his class. They said, he could be. I said, I don't care. It's my class. My job was to deliver for you a valuable class. This sometimes happens like not dramatic like that as executive, senior. But in the classroom, you get students who talk a lot, even if it's here or at NASA or wherever I'm teaching, people who kind of want to dominate everything and they know all the answers. Sometimes they're very eager. That's a positive thing. Sometimes they just want to dominate. You need to be very sensitive, but students appreciate when you stay in control of the class. If you lose control of the class, then they lose respect for you because you're not in charge. But you have to do it gently, and you have to keep the class on your side.
This was my next question about any advice for students, any advice for teachers, but that can suffix for that. You always say that your course is not about passing grades, but about passing life.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you do that? And how can other teachers do that?
Students are still humans.
Mm-hmm.
They're not just bodies sitting there that you're throwing information at. They have feelings, they have cares, they have troubles, they have concerns. So you have to realize that when you're teaching them, you need to make a way for the things you're trying to get them to learn, which may help their lives, may help them if they use it, to actually sink in. Otherwise, there's too many raincoats. It might fall off. I'm worried about my grades. I'm worried about getting my placements. I'm worried about mom and papa are going to think about me if I don't pass out top marks or something. These things are all in their minds. I have another assignment due tomorrow. I'm late. Whatever it is. If you don't keep those in mind, it's easy to get cold to them. My job is just to give the information. If they don't take it, that's their fault. No. It's my job to reach them.
Mm-hmm.
What does that take? So I went to a school in Tamil Nadu, built in a rural area by an entrepreneur. He made a lot of money. He built a rural school for the rural people. These kids were all like farmers' children, sugarcane growers' children. They would never go to school. He built this school for them in this rural area. So I went there and talked to these children. And this big classroom, maybe 100, 200 students. And I wanted them to draw a map. Who am I? Take a piece of paper and who am I? And they started writing. And you could see their dreams and things coming on this paper. And I went around the room and I would get next to a student and I would just kneel down next to them on the floor. They're sitting in their desk and say, what does this mean? What does that mean? And the student is next to me. Afterwards, the teachers came to me in the teacher's room and they said, did you see what he did? I said, Yeah, we made these little maps. He said, no, he went and touched the students. It never occurred to me. To me, it was just a natural thing to do. But they have the idea the teacher is in the front, is superior, stays above the students. I didn't crawl on the floor, but I went down to their level to touch them. And they were touched. That's what they needed. They were so afraid, I'm nothing. I don't know anything about what this guy is saying. Who am I? I'm a lowly person. Mm-hmm. No, you're a human being. You're equal to me in every way that God made me, God made you. We're no different.
I've kind of realized after talking to so many professors that in US, also in India, there is a certain level of respect. You kind of, assume that the teacher, the professor is, above you in all the senses. And and that's a part of our culture also. You call them professors, you don't call them by first name. So what's the difference between, you have taught at Duke, you have taught at a couple of colleges, and then you're teaching at ISB for more than 15 years, even before this Mohali campus was built. What are some differences between Indian students and the students abroad? And what are certain things that each of these cultures need to learn from each other?
That's quite a complicated question, actually. And I'm not a psychologist or sociologist. So my observations are very superficial. But you're right. There's a sort of inherent respect in Eastern in general, not just Indian, Eastern cultures in general for the learned one. Whether it's the guru or the master or the teacher, professor, or the elder even. That's a little bit missing in the West. Mm-hmm. I think we've lost some of that, more than we should have. Doesn't mean we have to go all the way back, to where we were, but there's a little bit of that missing. On the other hand, Western culture has a little bit more of colleagues. So I'll give an example. My TA here, working at the college here in India, she got her PhD. So I called her, hey, professor, how are you doing? She said, no, you are professor. I said, you're a professor? She had to think about it. I'm saying, you are my colleague. She had a hard time with that, establishing that she is my colleague. But, in the West, we have a little bit more willingness to say, you're a colleague, I'm a colleague. It doesn't make a difference where you came from, your background. You got a PhD, I got a PhD. We're a colleague, whatever, we're the same. So we have a little bit to learn from each other, I think.
You mentioned that one regret was not to learn Hindi that much. What was some other regret in your life, which if you were to go back in the past and you have to change that, what would that be?
The only other thing I've regretted over my life is not doing more music.
Okay. But you learned saxophone at the age of 58.
58, so it's a little bit late.
Yeah.
And if I'd learned earlier, I would have played a lot more. But I played guitar, I learned to play piano now in my elder years by myself. And I would have spent more time investing in that because it's one of those things that you need to invest in, like health or something you need to invest daily, or whatever, routinely. So I'll give you an example. My wife is very good at this. She learned to play flute later in life, like I played saxophone, but she practices every day, diligently, almost religiously, every day, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and she's getting very good. I practiced for a while, I stopped for a while. I'm not as dedicated. And that's my problem, which is why I didn't stick with it. I practiced drums, I practiced guitar, I practiced piano, I played sousaphone in the band, I played big bass guitar, 12-string guitar, I played saxophone, I played clarinet. I tried so many instruments, but I never get good, at any one of them, really good. Mm-hmm. And I think I would have done that differently. And I would advise, whatever you're doing, spend more time on the arts and pleasure things that you will do more of later in life, because the more you invest in them, you will do them better. I'll give you a positive ending. One thing I did do well that I'm very happy I did, all of my life, since I met my wife in college, we learned to dance together. All of our lives, we have taken dancing very seriously. And as much as we can, we do dancing. And we've invested in it. So we are good dancers, ballroom dancers. We don't perform for competition, but we dance very well. And that's a wonderful, wonderful thing we have to do together because we invested in it. If we had not invested decades ago, we would not start at 65. Many people try. Well, at 65, I'll take up some hobby.
Doesn't work.
It doesn't work. And playing cards maybe, or playing some mahjong, something, passive, but an active hobby, very difficult. So that's a great investment we made. And I'm very happy we made that investment. So we made that one. We missed some others, but we made that one.
Wow. And what's on your bucket list?
Still on my bucket list?
Yes.
I had a few things on there. One was to be in a Bollywood movie.
Oh.
I haven't succeeded yet in that. Another one was to go to Antarctica. I don't think that'll ever happen.
Why do you think so?
I don't know. It's very difficult to get there. You have to be a scientist or in a political situation with the government. There are tourists who can go there, but it's very expensive now. I have other priorities. Most of the things I've pretty much checked off. Not a big long list anymore.
Maybe I can help you with the first one. I'm meeting a couple of directors, so I'll pitch it in your profile for them.
Just even in the crowd, throwing some colors. Who knows? Doesn't have to be a role.
Okay. No, but we'll try to fix one for you. And hopefully, but thanks a lot for doing this, sir. Really enjoyed it. I hope even if 10 students learn something from this and, change their life in a drastic way, or small things, for many people, there is one word in this entire conversation which kind of, change them, which can give them some inspiration. I believe that our job is done. I'm really grateful for this.